Have you ever entered a place where the silence seems to speak? Where every wall seems to hold a secret that no one dares to tell? I did. And that's where it all began. A young woman disappeared inside her own home. Door locked, windows sealed, and no sign of escape. As if she had been erased from reality. This wasn't just another case. It was an invitation. A call to delve into something that goes beyond logic, beyond reason. Clara left no ordinary traces. She left enigmas. And each clue I found seemed to pull me closer to a place where time doesn't obey rules. Where fear isn't the enemy, it's the guide. During this investigation, I discovered that what disappears isn't always lost. Sometimes it's hidden in another layer of reality. And that's what Clara seemed to be searching for. An unseen but palpable way out. A door that doesn't open with a key, but with intention. And I followed her, even without knowing what I would find. Before we begin, tell me something. Where are you watching this video from? I want to know if I've been near any cases in your city. You never know. There might be something there too. Something that hasn't been discovered yet. Something waiting to be investigated. I've never been the type to get scared easily. I've entered houses where the silence screamed louder than any alarm. I've faced empty stares and confessions that seemed whispered by another voice. But that case made me doubt what's possible. A young woman disappeared inside her own home. Door locked, windows sealed, and no sign of escape. It was as if Clara had evaporated. There were no footprints, no fingerprints out of place. The police thought it was a game, a staged event, perhaps even a planned escape. But I felt something different. The atmosphere of the house seemed suspended. As if time had stopped there, or worse, folded back on itself. The call came on a cold morning. The mother was crying, the father was trying to keep his composure, but there was something in his eyes that bothered me. Fear perhaps, or guilt. When I entered the house, I felt a chill that didn't come from the wind. It was as if someone was watching me, even with all the rooms empty. And it was there, with that first step into the room, that I realized. This wouldn't be an ordinary case. It wasn't just about a missing young woman. It was about what happens when the human mind mixes with the inexplicable. And I was about to discover that some doors, even locked ones, hide more than we can imagine. The first thing I did was investigate the house's history. It wasn't just an old building. It was a place marked by silence and tragedy. I discovered that 30 years earlier, a woman had disappeared there, also without a trace. The case was closed as inconclusive, but the neighbors still whispered about it. It was as if the house had swallowed two people. The woman's name was Helena. Young, an artist, she lived alone. They say she started painting strange pictures before she disappeared. Distorted shapes, faces without eyes, doors that led nowhere. One of the paintings was still stored in the basement, covered by an old sheet. When I saw it, I felt a chill that didn't come from the cold. The house's architecture also drew attention. Narrow corridors, poorly distributed rooms, mirrors in improbable places. An architect who studied the original design told me it was built based on symbolic geometry. I never heard of that, but it sounded like something people who believe spaces can influence the mind would say. Clara had lived there for 2 years. The strangest thing. Clara knew Helena's story. In her diary I found a note. Could what happened to Helena happen to me? That made me stop. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was as if Clara was following in the footsteps of someone who had already disappeared. And perhaps, just perhaps, she knew more than she let on. Clara had the kind of look that always seemed to be somewhere else. In her mother's accounts, she was sweet but reserved. She was studying psychology, which already raised a red flag for me. People who delve deep into the human mind sometimes get lost in it. She had few friends, avoided social media, and spent hours locked in her room. She wasn't reclusive because of shyness. It was by choice. As I got to know her better, I realized that Clara wasn't just introspective, she was restless. She had an almost obsessive curiosity about phenomena that defy logic. Lucid dreams, out-of-body experiences, altered states of consciousness. All of this was written down in notebooks hidden in her desk drawer. She didn't want to understand the world. She wanted to transcend it. The mother said that, in recent weeks, Clara seemed different, quieter, more distant. Sometimes she would stand staring at herself in the mirror for hours. She said she heard her daughter talking to herself, as if she were conversing with someone who wasn't there. The father thought it was just stress from college. But I knew it was something deeper. Clara was in transition. What intrigued me was the way she wrote about herself. "I am a body trying to escape matter," she said on one page. It wasn't just poetry. It was almost a warning. Clara didn't want to run away from home. She wanted to escape reality. And perhaps in that process she found an escape that no one else can see. The first thing that struck me was the absence of chaos. Nothing broken, nothing out of place, except for a cracked mirror in the hallway. The front door was locked from the inside, the windows sealed, and all the keys were in the house. Clara simply vanished, as if she had stepped through thin air. In her room, the bed was made, her cell phone was on the desk, and a cup of tea was still warm. This indicated that the disappearance had happened minutes before her parents arrived. Time seemed frozen there. It was as if the house had stopped to observe the exact moment Clara ceased to exist. And nobody saw anything. I searched every corner carefully. The cupboard, the books, even behind the curtains. Nothing. No sign of a struggle, no trace of an escape. The only thing out of the ordinary was a circular mark on the floor, made with white chalk. Her mother said she'd never seen anything like it before. But Clara had drawn it for a reason, and I needed to find out why. The police treated it as a voluntary disappearance. But I knew it wasn't that simple. Clara didn't leave through the door. She didn't leave through the window. She didn't leave. And yet she was no longer there. It was at that moment that I began to consider a hypothesis that few would accept. What if Clara had crossed an invisible border? As soon as I entered the house, I felt that something was out of place. And I'm not talking about the furniture. It was as if the air was denser, as if each wall held a secret. The silence was unusual. It was heavy, a kind of silence that seems to observe. My footsteps echoed as if someone were listening, waiting. In the hallway, the broken mirror looked like it had been hit hard, but there were no shards on the floor. As if someone had carefully picked everything up. Or as if the mirror had broken from the inside. The crack formed a kind of star right in the center. And curiously, it only reflected part of my face. The room was immaculate, but there was one detail that bothered me. A picture frame turned upside down. When I lifted it, I saw a photo of Clara as a child, with a look that was far too serious for her age. Behind the frame, a handwritten phrase. "She always knew." That made me stop. Who wrote that? And why? Each room seemed to have its own temperature, its own smell, its own energy. Clara's room was cold, the bathroom stuffy, the kitchen almost welcoming. It was as if the house were alive, reacting to my presence. And I still didn't know if it wanted to help me, or keep me away from what was to come. Clara's mother greeted me with swollen eyes and trembling hands. She spoke quickly, as if trying to fill the silence with words. But there was something strange. She avoided looking into her daughter's room. When I asked about the last few days, she hesitated. She said Clara had been acting differently, but she couldn't explain how. The father, on the other hand, was the opposite. Short answers, a fixed gaze, as if he were trying to maintain a facade. When I mentioned Clara's diary, he turned pale. He said he didn't know she wrote in it. But there was a tension in the air, as if he knew more than he was letting on. And he didn't want me to find out. During the conversation, I realized that the two disagreed on almost everything. The mother thought Clara was being haunted by something. The father said it was just her imagination. But when I mentioned the story of Helena, the woman who disappeared there before, they both fell silent. It was as if I had touched an old wound. The mother then told me, almost whispering, that Clara was afraid of the house. That she said she heard voices, felt presences. And that, days before disappearing, she asked to sleep in her parents' room. The father interrupted, saying it was an exaggeration. But I knew that, behind that disagreement there was a secret. And it was about to emerge. Clara's room was a world apart. The walls were painted in soft tones, but the atmosphere was heavy, as if the air there held memories. On the desk, psychology books were mixed with titles on spirituality and quantum physics. Curious contrast. In the corner, a bookshelf held objects arranged in an almost ritualistic way. Everything seemed to have been placed there intentionally. It was there that I found the diary. Black cover, no name, hidden under the mattress. The pages were filled with notes about recurring dreams, voices calling her name, and a presence watching her. Clara wrote as if trying to decipher a code. Each sentence seemed like a clue, and some seemed written in moments of pure despair. One of the pages struck me. "She's here." But not like before. The handwriting was shaky, as if it had been written in haste. Next to it, a drawing of a door without a handle. Clara was trying to understand something that most people would ignore. And perhaps in that process she crossed an invisible line. A line that separates the real from the inexplicable. In the closet I found a box with old tapes. Audio recordings she had made herself during the early hours of the morning. Distorted sounds, whispers, and in one of them, a voice that wasn't hers said, "You shouldn't be here." That gave me chills. Clara was documenting something. And perhaps, unintentionally, she left clues for anyone who dared to follow. It was on the second day of my investigation that I found the note. It was torn, tucked between the pages of a book about altered states of consciousness. The sentence was short but disturbing. "She is here." There was no signature, no context. Just those 3 words like a whisper left behind. And I knew it wasn't a metaphor. On the desk there was a digital recorder. Clara used to record audio during the early morning hours as part of a personal experiment. In one of the recordings, I heard sounds I couldn't identify. They weren't voices, nor ordinary noises. They seemed like layers of sound, as if several frequencies were superimposed. And in the background, breathing. These clues were unconventional. They didn't point to a culprit, nor to an escape route. They pointed to a state of mind. Clara was trying to capture something unseen, something felt. And perhaps, unintentionally, she left a trail. A trail that only those who listen carefully can follow. The note, the audio recording, the drawings in the diary. Everything seemed like part of a puzzle. But not a logical puzzle. It was as if Clara was trying to communicate with someone, or something that didn't inhabit the same plane. And I was beginning to understand that this investigation wouldn't be done solely with evidence. It would be done with intuition. The more I read the diary, the more Clara revealed herself. She wasn't just a curious young woman. She was a constantly expanding mind. She had traits of deep introspection, but also a restlessness bordering on the existential. Clara didn't want simple answers. She wanted to understand what exists between what we call real and what we feel as truth. I noticed writing patterns that indicated episodes of dissociation. In certain passages, she referred to herself in the third person. In others, she said that the real Clara was trapped somewhere. This made me think of extreme mental states, perhaps induced by isolation or emotional overload. But there was something more. Something that didn't fit into diagnoses. She also demonstrated an unusual sensitivity. She noticed details that went unnoticed by others. Sounds, smells, vibrations. She wrote about frequencies that don't belong to this world. It was as if Clara were tuned to a station that no one else could pick up. And this, at the same time, fascinated and frightened her. The most disturbing thing was reading a phrase repeated on several pages. "I am not from here." It wasn't a metaphor. It was a statement. Clara believed her mind was connected to something beyond. And perhaps, in trying to access that beyond, she crossed an invisible boundary. A boundary that I now needed to understand, before it swallowed me up too. The police arrived before me, of course. They followed basic protocol: perimeter isolation, fingerprint collection, interviews with the parents. But they quickly ruled out kidnapping or forced entry. "There are no signs of forced entry," they said. And with that, they began to treat the case as a voluntary disappearance. But I knew Clara hadn't run away. She had simply dissolved. I spoke with the officer in charge. A skeptical, straightforward man who didn't believe anything but concrete evidence. When I mentioned the audio recordings and drawings, he laughed. He said young people go through those phases. But I'd seen that kind of disdain before. And I knew that when logic fails, mystery begins to speak louder. I decided to follow a parallel line. While they searched for physical traces, I delved into mental traces. Clara left clues, but not in footprints, in thoughts. I began to map her patterns, her words, her obsessions. It was like following an invisible thread that wound ever deeper inside the house. With each step, I felt I was moving further away from traditional investigation, but closer to the truth. Clara didn't disappear by accident. She was searching for something. And perhaps, in finding it, she left behind everything we know as reality. And I was about to discover what happens when someone crosses that line. The house where Clara disappeared wasn't just old. It was burdened. I started investigating the property records and found something curious. It had already been the scene of another disappearance, in 1995. A woman named Helena, a visual artist, vanished without a trace. The case was hushed up, treated as a voluntary escape. But the neighbors tell a different story. According to reports, Helena began acting strangely weeks before she disappeared. She painted pictures with floating doors, faceless eyes, and spirals that seemed to spin on their own. One of the paintings was still stored in the basement, covered by an old cloth. When I saw it, I felt an immediate unease. It was as if the painting was looking back at me. I spoke with a neighbor who had lived there for decades. She said that, since Helena's disappearance, the house had never been the same. Sounds at night, lights flickering for no reason, and a constant feeling of being watched. Clara knew this. She had researched Helena, and somehow she seemed fascinated by the story. In her diary, Clara wrote, "Helena tried to open the door. I'll manage to get through." That made me stop. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was as if Clara were following an old script, as if the house had chosen its victims. And I began to understand that perhaps Clara's disappearance wasn't the first, nor the last. It was on a rainy afternoon that I met Donna Ivone, the neighbor from next door. She called me over with a discreet gesture, like someone who had been carrying a secret for too long. We sat on her porch, surrounded by plants and silence. And then, without hesitation, she said, "I saw Clara that night." My heart raced. Finally, a witness. But what she said next left me speechless. She went through the wall. Donna Ivone swore she saw Clara leave the room and, instead of going to the door, walk straight to the hallway wall. She said it wasn't an illusion. That Clara seemed calm, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. And then she disappeared. I asked if she had told the police about it. She laughed a sad laugh. They would have called me crazy. And perhaps they would have. But I had already seen too much to rule out any possibility. Donna Ivone also said that, days before, Clara had come to her to ask about Helena. And that she left saying, "The house still remembers." That conversation left me uneasy. Clara was connecting dots that no one else saw. And Donna Ivone, with her tired eyes, seemed to be keeping more hidden than she revealed. Perhaps she knew what the house concealed. Or perhaps she was waiting for someone who would believe her. And I was beginning to understand that, to move forward, I would have to abandon logic. It was around the third week that I began to feel the effects of the affair on myself. I dreamed of Clara almost every night. Sometimes she guided me through endless corridors. Other times she just looked at me without saying anything. I would wake up with the feeling that something had followed me into the real world. And that wasn't normal. Not even for me. I began to question my own sanity. I've seen a lot, heard confessions that would keep anyone awake at night. But this case stirred something deeper. It was as if Clara was trying to tell me something, not with words but with her presence. And I didn't know if I was being chosen or tested. I spoke with a colleague from my academic days, a specialist in investigative psychology. He told me that cases like this can create psychic bonds. That sometimes the investigator connects so much with the victim that they begin to live part of the experience. I thought that was an exaggeration. But I couldn't ignore the fact that I was changing. I started avoiding mirrors, hearing sounds that no one else could hear, feeling like the house was watching me, even when I wasn't there. It was as if Clara had left a part of herself with me. And deep down I knew, to understand what happened, I would have to go beyond the investigation. I would have to enter the same labyrinth she entered. The basement door had always been locked. My mother said it was only used to store old things, but no one had gone in there for years. When I finally managed to open it, the smell of mold and old would hit me like a forgotten memory. The space was small, stuffy, and in the corner, a box covered by a dark cloth. Inside, objects that made no sense. There were symbols drawn on the walls, circles, spirals, marks that looked like they were made with charcoal, and a cassette tape with Clara's name handwritten on it. I took it home to listen to, away from the pressure of the investigation. Her voice was calm, almost hypnotic. "If you're listening to this, it's because you've gotten as far as I have." My heart raced. She spoke of the house as if it were a living organism. She said there were doors that don't open with keys, but with intention, and that the basement was the point of convergence. Clara believed that there, in that forgotten space, a passage existed. Not a physical one but a mental one. And that she was preparing to cross it. The recording ended with a strange silence. A silence that seemed to be looking at me. I left the basement with the feeling that something had changed, as if I had crossed an invisible line. The door, previously locked, now seemed too wide open, and I was beginning to understand that Clara wasn't trying to escape the house. She was trying to enter something bigger, something that perhaps was waiting for her, and now, for me. It was during a sleepless night that everything started to fall into place. I reviewed Clara's recordings, drawings, and writings, and realized that she wasn't just investigating the house. She believed the place was a temporal knot, a point where time doesn't follow a straight line, but bends, intersects, and repeats itself. And that people like her could sense this. Clara spoke of moments that repeat themselves in silence. She wrote that sometimes she would wake up and see herself sleeping, that she would hear conversations that hadn't yet happened. It was as if she were living in two times at the same time. And the house, according to her, was the epicenter, a place where time unravels and reconstructs itself. This theory seemed absurd, until I started noticing patterns. Repeating schedules, objects changing places without explanation, and a constant feeling of déjà vu. Clara wasn't running away. She was trying to cross over. And perhaps by understanding how this knot worked, she found a way out that doesn't involve doors or windows. That's when I realized. The investigation wasn't about where Clara was. It was about when. And if she really managed to cross that breaking point, perhaps she was in another time. A time that coexisted with ours, but that only a few can access. And I was starting to feel like I was being pulled towards that same place. I decided to consult a specialist in the psychology of space and time. Yes, that exists. A retired professor who dedicated his life to studying how environments influence extreme mental states. When I told him about Clara, he wasn't surprised. He said that certain places act as catalysts, and that sensitive minds can be activated by them. According to him, Clara may have suffered a psychotic episode induced by isolation and symbolic stimulation. The house, with its mirrors, symbols, and history, would have acted as a trigger. But he also spoke of something rarer: perceptual expansion, a state in which the mind transcends the limits of consensual reality. Clara seemed to have come close to this. I showed him the drawings, the audio recordings, the writings. He analyzed everything calmly and said, "She wasn't running away. She was trying to find herself on another plane." That made me think, what if Clara wasn't ill, but in transition? What if what we call delirium is, in some cases, a form of heightened perception? This conversation changed my approach. I began to look at the signs not as symptoms, but as maps. Clara was following a path that few dare to tread. And perhaps by understanding this journey, I could discover where, or who, she had become. And what that said about the limits of the human mind. It was by chance, or perhaps not, that I discovered Clara had researched me before disappearing. A family friend showed me a folder on her computer with clippings from cases I investigated. She knew my name, my background, even details that aren't public. That gave me a lump in my throat. Clara chose me. Among the files there was a note. She understands what others ignore. It was about me. Clara believed I could decipher what she was trying to show. And that changed everything. The investigation ceased to be merely professional. It became personal, as if I were following a script written for me. I began rereading the diary with fresh eyes. Clara mentioned a mediator, someone who could cross over with her or bring her back. It was as if she were preparing me, even though we had never met. And that made me wonder. Did she somehow know I was coming? That I would be the only one to understand? This connection made me delve even deeper. I began to feel that I wasn't just investigating Clara. I was being guided by her. And perhaps, by following in her footsteps, I was getting closer to something that goes beyond the disappearance. Something that involves choices, intertwined destinies, and doors that only open for those who are ready. It was on one of the last tapes that I found the most disturbing video. Clara, sitting on the floor of her room, her eyes fixed on the camera, said, "If I disappear, it's not because I ran away. It's because I found what I was looking for." Her voice was firm, but her gaze, it seemed to be elsewhere, as if she were speaking from within the mystery. She continued, "Don't try to bring me back. Here, everything makes sense." And then she turned off the camera. That left me speechless for minutes. Clara wasn't asking for help. She was leaving instructions, as if she knew that someone, maybe me, would come looking for her. And that this someone would need to understand that not every disappearance is a loss. I watched the video several times, searching for details. In the background, there was a shadow that moved slowly. It wasn't clear or defined, but it was there. And Clara didn't seem scared. She seemed at peace, as if she had made peace with something most of us don't even dare to face. And that made me wonder, is she really gone? Or had Clara simply crossed over to a place where questions don't need answers? Where time isn't a line but a spiral? Where fear transforms into curiosity? I didn't know. But that video was more than a farewell. It was an invitation. And I was beginning to feel that, to understand Clara, I would have to accept that invitation. It was behind the broken mirror that I found what appeared to be a passageway. The crack revealed a hollow structure, and carefully, I removed part of the wall. There, hidden for years, was a small compartment. Inside, only a necklace, the same one Clara wore in the photos, and a wall covered in inscriptions. Short phrases, symbols, and one in particular. Truth doesn't fit in this world. I stood there for minutes trying to understand. It wasn't just a hiding place. It was a space of transition. Clara had left something there, not to be found, but to be felt. The inscription spoke of time, of identity, of rupture. It was as if she had left a map for whoever dared to follow it. And I was following it. The necklace still held the warmth of someone who believed. And the phrases. They weren't just words. They were affirmations. The body is just a bridge. Memory is the key. Fear is the guardian. Clara didn't run away. She crossed over. And perhaps, in that space between walls, she left behind everything that held her back, including her own form. I left the house with the feeling that something had changed within me. I didn't find Clara, but I found what she wanted to show me. And perhaps in understanding this, I crossed a door that cannot be seen, but which, once opened, never closes. And there was still one last thing I needed to do before closing this case. After everything, I returned to the house one last time. Not to investigate, but to feel. The place was different, lighter perhaps. Or perhaps I was. I walked through the rooms in silence, like someone visiting an old acquaintance. And I realized that Clara hadn't just left clues. She had left questions. Questions that don't have easy answers. About what is real, what is delusion, what is choice. Clara didn't disappear. She transformed. And in some ways she transformed me too. The investigation took me to places no map shows. And now I carry a piece of her with me. Sometimes I still hear her voice in my dreams. Not as a call but as a memory. Clara didn't want to be found. She wanted to be understood. And perhaps, in trying to understand what she went through, I crossed a door that doesn't close. A door that exists within each of us. And that's why this case will never be closed. Because it doesn't end with a body, nor with an answer. It ends with silence. A silence that asks, what if all of this is real? What if you, on the other side, have already felt something similar? Because sometimes, the mystery isn't in the house. It's within us. After everything I experienced in this case, one thing became clear. Not every disappearance is absence. Sometimes it's transformation. Clara didn't just leave behind a mystery. She left a mirror. A mirror that forces us to look inside and ask, what are we trying to escape? And what are we ready to find? This investigation taught me that the human mind is a territory as vast as any map. And that, when someone decides to cross the boundaries of reality, there is no turning back. Clara went further. And perhaps, without realizing it, she left us with an invitation. An invitation to question what we call normal. And to explore what we call impossible. If you've made it this far, perhaps you've also felt something. A shiver, a doubt, a memory. And that's no coincidence. The mysteries we investigate say more about us than about others. So, before I finish, I leave you with a question. What would you do if you found a door that no one else can see? If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are many other cases waiting to be solved. And who knows? The next one might happen near you. Or inside you.